Hello and welcome to this Ferrar Code Bright Talk presentation. My name is Chris Kirsch. I'm a director at Ferrar Code, and today I'd like to talk to you about how to keep business continuity and control AppSec costs in turbulent times that we're in. So in this webinar, I'll cover three topics. We will cover how to protect your online revenue streams by reducing application security risks. We'll also talk about making AppSec programs resilient to work-from-home challenges, and then also how to drastically reduce the cost of your AppSec program. So a quick background on myself. I have about 23 years of experience in InfoSec, worked in crypto when that still meant cryptography and not currency, penetration testing, incident response, and now application security at Ferrar Code. I won the Black Badge a couple of years ago at DEF CON for the Social Engineering CTF, and I'm an advisor to the National Child Protection Task Force for OSINT and social engineering. All right, so let's jump into the first topic, protecting your online revenue streams. And this has become a lot more important as we have entered this COVID crisis, and I will talk you through why that is. So as social distancing measures are in place, the physical interactions in businesses are way down. And as a counterweight, the online interactions are actually way up, right? So if you think about the education space, universities can't have students there anymore in person, right? So remote learning is where they're shifting towards, so that's up. In retail, brick and mortar shopping just isn't feasible right now. And even when shops open back up, people are going to be reluctant to engage in the same manner, and they prefer to order online. And even in banking, I got a call from my local branch that they're going to remain closed for the near future at least, and other branches that I can visit, and the online options that I have available for interacting with them. So a lot more business is shifting online. So as that happens, software really becomes part of your value stream. This is, software is really in the middle of how you make money. And so when we're thinking about business continuity and protecting our core business, the business continuity of online systems becomes really critical. At the same time, what's happening is cybercrime is rising globally. And we're already seeing some of that, but if you just take a step back and think about cybercrime a little bit, as opposed to hacktivism and state-sponsored cybersecurity or hacking, right? Cybercrime is motivated by money, and it's not only motivated by greed, it's also motivated by economic inequality. We're seeing a lot of cybercrime based in Russia and Ukraine and Nigeria and China because people don't see a good way to monetize their IT skills, right, in their local economy. The best way to monetize their IT skills is through cybercrime. And so as fewer people around the world who have IT skills have the chance to make an earnest living, some of them will turn to cybercrime. And that's why I think we will see a rise in cybercrime globally, especially in areas that are easy to monetize. And so this increases the cyber threats for the businesses as they're shifting more and more of their business online. Also, AppSec becomes part of that business continuity, right? If you're thinking about security online, AppSec is a critical part of that. It's inside of the transactions that you make on the on websites, on mobile apps, and all of those things. If your only way to make money goes down and is interrupted, you have a real problem, right? Because you're not going to make money from your brick and mortar business anymore right now. all of your money is coming in online, so AppSec is a critical protector of that online revenue stream. And while in the past AppSec might have been more a question of compliance, where you're just trying to check the box, now it's more a question of risk reduction and ultimately survival. You need to reduce the risk, protect your digital assets from compromise, from interruption, right? And that's going to protect your business. And what we're seeing actually among our customer base and the rest of the industry is that many companies are doubling down on projects, for example, like moving to the cloud and accelerating their digital transformation projects because they realize that this is strategic for their business right now. Now, we all know budgets are super tight right now. Everybody's trying to cut back, and you need to justify existing spend as well. So I thought in this first part of the presentation, I'd also go a little bit into how you can ask for budget or defend your budget or even expand your budget. And I brought you 3 examples from 3 industries, but by walking you through 3 different industries, I know that you might be in a different industry from those. I think you can kind of grasp the concept because you'll see a lot of parallels. So let's talk about asking for budget in the education sector. Then we'll go to retail and another sector as well. And I'll walk you through how I would make that argument back to the business, right? Because you don't want to make a technical argument or even a security argument right now. I think you need to make an argument of how that's important to the business. So the first part of that logic chain would be that digital processes are more important. For example, in education, social distancing has forced educators to teach online. So that makes our online teaching platforms and the software to enable that a critical part of the value chain. Online training is the only viable business model right now. And it's even an opportunity to grow our student base, right? For example, otherwise we're constrained by maybe the regional aspect where we might not have as many international students or students from out of state or whatever your particular situation is for that business. Or you might not have enough seats and spaces in the dorms to accommodate more students. Once you go online, you can scale a lot better, right? So that's even an opportunity to grab a bigger student base. And all of that enablement is driven by software. So the business must be able to rely on the software that runs these processes. And because we must be able to rely on that, we can't afford any vulnerabilities inside that software that might disrupt the service, bring it down, get our students breached and hurt our online brand, right? So therefore, application security protects the digital value chain from disruption by cyber criminals, right? So I hope that makes sense, and that's how you tie the current situation and the fundamental needs as a business back to application security, and you can make a strong case for application security. Let's do 2 more examples, and I'll move through these a lot quicker because especially towards the end of the argument chain, the logic chain, you'll see that they are very much alike, right? So let's have a look at that for retail. So with social distancing measures in place, brick and mortar retail has ground to a halt, but online retail is seeing a huge increase. I actually just heard a podcast with a platform that offers online retail spaces that is growing a lot as people are sometimes laid off, building their own businesses. Other businesses are trying to shift online. So there's actually a huge increase in online retail right now. Then this makes digital processes an even more critical part of the value chain, right? Whereas online retail might have been a side business for you in the past. Now it's really like where you make your money. This is how you survive. And then the rest of the logic chain is really the same. Our business must be able to rely on the software that runs these processes, and application security protects our digital value chain from disruption by cyber criminals, right? So it's only the first two parts that change. Let's have a look at another industry. So insurance, right? Here in insurance, we can say, for example, I think I used life insurance here in my mental model. So the global health pandemic has caused a rise in people seeking life insurance, right? And this is actually true if you look at the numbers. So previously, insurance agents would have processed these applications, in person, but social distance measures are driving people online to get their life insurance, right? So this makes your digital processes an even more critical part of the value chain. And our business must be able to rely on the software, and that's why we need application security. So I hope that this has helped you kind of see that logic chain and how you would tie your business to application security. All right, now to part two, how to make your AppSec program more resilient to work from home challenges. So this here is the new normal for most of us right now. And I'm sitting at home providing this webcast to you from my house. Everyone's remote. Teams are distributed, and that might even be true in the previous normal, where you have people all around the globe. But it's even more distributed right now because there is probably no two employees in the same place. So things like running a physical server at your data center is all of a sudden a lot less appealing, and it's become a huge pain. Maybe you can't even get into your data center. Maybe it's only a very limited number of people that have access right now. And so if you're running an on-prem solution in your data center, that's become a lot more challenging, even though you might have, some remote desktop tools and so on. Sometimes you still need somebody to swap out a hard drive. You need somebody to push the reset button, etc. So there is a lot of shift towards online cloud resources and SaaS solutions. If you look at Microsoft, they saw so many people shift to Microsoft Azure as the pandemic hit that they were struggling to add enough servers to their data centers to meet that demand. And what we're seeing in conversations with customers is that SaaS has now won over even the most skeptical companies. So there is a huge acceleration towards a SaaS model because it's easier to operate, better for remote workers, and just better for business overall. And the industry analysts are seeing the same thing. So Gartner, for example, said, if implemented correctly, cloud services should be well positioned to support the rising requests such as those exhibited during the COVID-19 crisis. And Forrester said, and this was specific to Europe, which has always been a little bit more reluctant towards cloud, more so than the US, they said, expect an acceleration towards heavier use of cloud-based security solutions. So everybody is moving towards cloud because it's a much more viable model to run your business today. So how do you reduce the cost of your AppSec program? There are a few aspects to consider. The first one is cost is more than just your licenses. So the cost of your AppSec program is, for example, it's the people that run the solution, right? And people cost increase with complexity. So you want to have a solution that has less complexity. It's also in the technical infrastructure that you're setting up, so including the hardware that you're buying and putting in your data center, the software, the AppSec software that you're buying, but then also the operating system licenses, the database licenses, and the people cost to maintain and keep that up and running. And you also need to make sure that you're comparing apples to apples, especially when you're comparing an on-premise solution with a SaaS solution, because there are a lot of differences, especially when you look at operational costs. One of the things that we're observing as a SaaS vendor is that scan volume doubles every year. And I'm sure you've heard of the story of, the person who, doubling every year means exponential growth, right? And if you think about the example of, putting one grain of rice on the first square of a chessboard, and then doubling that for the next one and the next one. You're ending up with a pretty large number by the time you reach the last square on the chessboard. This exponential growth means you need to double your server capacity every year if you're scanning on-prem. So reducing the cost of your application security program is really not trend favored. And what I mean by that is more and more companies are scanning with CI/CD pipelines. Release cycles are increasing. They're scanning more and more often. And as a security person, you want that. You want them to scan earlier and more often because they'll catch security flaws more quickly. It's cheaper to fix. For the developers, they've got more predictability of their roadmap. But you're also being asked to do more and more applications and doing it with less and less money, right? So you're really getting crunched in the middle. And so with Ferrar Code, our scan volume doubles every year, and we're spending a huge amount of time and money to make sure that our systems scale, our systems are available, auto-scaling, and that we always take care of the bottlenecks in the system, right? What is going to be the next bottleneck that might slow things down, that might not enable us to scale? So this is really doubling every year is a lot of work, and that's something that you'd have to consider doing yourself in an on-premise solution. So it's not just the year one cost that you should have a look at, but also looking at the big trends. You'll have to scale with demand. If you don't have enough scan capacity, what happens is you will have to queue scans up. If you have 10 pipelines running at the same time, and you only have 3 parallel scans that your engines support, then you'll have to queue up the remaining 7 ones. What that means is these remaining 7 pipelines will have a certain timeout. You might break the build, right, on 7 development teams. They will get an alert. They can't complete the build. They can't deploy. Expect some angry calls from your development teams. They'll have to manually override that and so on. So that's not a position that you want to be in. So the other option when you're on-prem is to scale up. Remember, demand is uneven. Sometimes people scan a certain time of the year. Sometimes they scan on Fridays because they want to finish things up, or at the end of every 2 weeks because that's when their sprint ends. And because demand is uneven, if you build this out in an on-prem environment, you'll have to build everything for peak demand. So when you're building it out for peak demand, that means most of your servers are running idle most of the time. That really pushes up your cost, right? So it's really hard to get that right. If you build it out too big, your cost will explode. If you build it out too small, you get angry calls from the developers as their pipeline breaks. So it's really hard to get the scaling right with an on-premise solution. And SaaS solutions here will auto-scale that for you. And also another thing is they will not only auto-scale it for you, but they're also spreading the demand over all of their customers, right? If it's a true multi-tenant solution where you're not setting up individual islands per customer, then all of that demand is spread across the customer base. So for Ferrar Code, that's 2,500 companies and many, many more applications, right? So that way you can spread the scale across a lot more companies. So let's have a look at what that looks like in real life. So here what we're looking at is the deployment recommendation for an on-premise solution, a competitive on-premise solution with a single server. So I started out with that, and we're going to get into more complex environments in a moment. But I wanted to start out with that because it's the simplest possible example, right? So if you have a single server, it means you have low complexity, but it also means you have a single point of failure. If that one server goes down and you're embedded in all of the pipeline, that's a risk for you to consider. You can use the server for, in this particular competitor's example, between 1 and 3 concurrent scans. It's subject to the RAM and the cores that you have, and also the size of the application. You'll have to put a Windows license on there, a Windows Server license, a SQL Server license, so that's also additional cost. And you could run that on an AWS box, of course, but you could also run it on bare metal in your data center. So the risks here are single point of failure. Also, if the scans are automated, you could break the build. And most companies will have to scale up. If all you need is 1 or 2 applications and scanning that, then quite honestly, just with the licenses you're buying from Ferrar Code, you'll probably be cheaper, especially if you consider the labor cost and the effort to set this up, because with us, you'd just be able to upload and scan. But let's say you'd need a little bit more power under the hood and you've got more than 1 or 2 applications, right? So then this is what a high availability and scalable deployment looks like. So first of all, you'll have to put a third-party load balancer in front of the whole setup. Then you'll need several management servers, right? So this is usually, it depends on how much you want to scale in your organization. And then you have to scale the engines. So let's talk a little bit about that. First of all, if you're running an on-premise installation, what most people do is they build out this whole thing in every major location. So that means it's not just a one-time, one-place thing that you have to build out. You have to build it out for every major location that you're building in. So your major hubs. Second thing is you need to figure out how many engines to build out. So that's really a calculation that has a lot of different inputs, some of which you don't know and some of which you don't control. So for example, how many applications do you have? How often are these applications being scanned? Is there a certain schedule at which they will be scanned? And how many will you have scanning at the same time? How big are those applications? Because the technical requirements for the engines need to be built out for the size. So for example, you'll need a very beefy machine for some of the larger applications, and they can't run on any engine. So it really depends on that, and you need to figure out how to scope that. What I've seen is that a lot of the on-premise vendors do not go through the scoping exercise with you until you've signed the PO. That's part of the post-deployment efforts. And so what I encourage you to do is to ask your vendors before you sign the dotted line to scope this out for you, and then do a calculation of, okay, how much would this cost in terms of the hardware, the underlying software, so the Windows licenses, SQL Server licenses, and then also the labor to install this and to deploy it and maintain it. And then the other thing to keep in mind is that even though you spent a ton of effort and money into redundancies to get to that high availability, all of the red parts here in that top manager here, if that one server goes down, all of your reporting and platform features are down as well, because those features are not built out in a redundant way, right? So even though you're spending all of this time trying to get to a high availability and redundant solution, it's not actually going to help. So with Ferrar Code, as a SaaS solution, we're a multi-tenant, right? We do all of that stuff for you. We make sure that all of the services are available. We build out high availability, auto-scaling, all of that stuff. So all of the complexity that you had to deal with on the previous slide is all in our backend, in our cloud, right, that you don't have to deal with. Another thing you should ask your on-premise vendor is who's managing the systems. And who's managing the systems should be a three-part question. First of all, who's managing the system updates and vulnerability patches for the AppSec solution itself that you're buying the licenses from them for? Then who's managing the system components? That means the the database, for example. And then who's managing the operating system? Now, if it's all on-premise, then probably that's all on you. If it's all in the cloud, then that's all on the vendor. But there are kind of like mixed models where on-premise vendors, realizing that companies really want to go to the cloud and have a SaaS solution, what they're doing is they're putting all of this complex infrastructure into an AWS private cloud or any other cloud vendor, into a private cloud for you, and to help you bring that into a cloud model. Now here it's even more important to ask that question. Who's updating the AppSec solution? Who's updating the system components? And who's updating the operating system? Because now you've got the question of whose responsibility is that, right? And for example, just for the AppSec solution, we saw one competitor issue 7 hot fixes in less than 3 months. So that's considerable work that you have to do. Also bear in mind that if they're setting something up as a private cloud just for you, then you're not getting any of the auto-scaling and shared cost, like economies of scale, advantages that you're getting from a native SaaS solution. So here, your cost will be higher. And also high availability needs to be built out for every customer for a private cloud solution. So let's have a look at that real quick, what that looks like in a table. So when you're comparing options and looking at risk and budget and all of these things, trying to reduce your overall cost, both in the external spend and also how much you're spending on people, because probably on your team, labor is a challenge, right? You can't hire new people. You might have been underfunded or under-resourced before. So things that cost energy on your team really need to be weighed very carefully. So let's talk about that. So on-premise, operating cost is your budget risk. Scan volume doubles every year. You need to take care of the additional server capacity, and that's on you to factor into your budget. Scalability is your responsibility. You need to figure out how you scale the solution so that pipelines don't break and that you keep cost contained. High availability is your responsibility and cost. You need to buy the load balancer. You need to set up all the different management servers and engines and set those up to ensure high availability. And then also the maintenance, all of the upgrades, all of the troubleshooting when a scan gets stuck, for example, right? That's your responsibility and cost. The private cloud offerings that many on-premise vendors are starting to put out there, a lot of this is undefined. So these are definitely questions you want to ask as part of your buying cycle. Who's covering the operating cost of the private cloud? How is it scaled? Does it auto-scale? Do I have to manually scale? Are you taking care of that? What if we scale to more engines? Is that operating cost covered? Then also high availability. That's going to probably come at an extra charge because there's extra cost per customer for the on-premise vendor to put you in a private cloud. And then also the maintenance. It's often undefined, and sometimes they'll hand wave and say, oh, we'll take care of it, and they'll only mean their part of the solution. But you really need the underlying operating system to be secure. You need the databases to be secure, right? So make sure that you really lock that down. Now, if we compare that to a native SaaS vendor, the operating cost is the vendor's risk, right? So as Ferrar Code, when we calculate our prices, we spread that risk across all of the customers, right? One customer might scan a lot more, and we won't make any money on them. Another one may be the opposite. But no customer knows where they're going to head because most of the time the security team that's got the budget does not control the amount of scanning. That's the development team, right? So there is a lot of risk involved. And because we can spread that risk across all of our customers, it's like, buying an insurance. Like if you don't know if you're going to have an expensive car accident this year, but because that risk is spread across all of the people that buy insurance from your company, you can get a pretty good rate. Then the scalability, that's the vendor's responsibility. And here, Ferrar Code, for example, we have a pool of scan engines that's always on, and we also auto-scale with demand, right? If we need more capacity, we can spin that up very, very quickly. So that's something that's in our DNA, and that's our responsibility. High availability, that cost is split across all of our customers because it's a multi-tenant SaaS solution, not a private cloud solution. So we can offer high availability out of the box, even if you just need one application scanned, right? And then maintenance, that's really our responsibility. We make sure that our platform is up to date. We actually deploy just our application security automation layer. We deploy that several times a week with new updates, new functionality, all of those things. You don't have to take care of any of that. We also take care of the underlying operating system and any databases and other infrastructure that is deployed. So quick overview of the Ferrar Code approach, and I won't go into that super deep. So first of all, Ferrar Code has a three-prong approach to application security, and I didn't really talk to all of them in this presentation. The first part is the actual application analysis. So this is often automated for static analysis, dynamic analysis, software composition analysis, and interactive application security testing, IAST. But it's also sometimes manual because we also offer penetration testing. And we offer all of that from one vendor. So what we focus on here in this part is that we help you integrate security into the pipeline. So security is automated, and it's part of the development process. We can cover all application types, whether it's a web application, mobile, client server, any of that, backend APIs, web services, those kind of things. And we also cover a whole bunch of languages and frameworks. It's growing every day. I think the last time I looked, it was 26 languages and over 100 frameworks, right? So those need to be supported to give you quality results. And then we also help you consolidate all of your AppSec solutions. So that means that you only have one contract, one console, one vendor, one reporting, one integration, those kind of things to help you automate your application analysis. The second part is developer enablement. So here we help you focus on fixing and not just finding. We find that a lot of application security programs out there fail because, yes, they're scanning, they're telling people what they're doing wrong, but they're not providing help with how developers can fix. And that's something that we place a tremendous amount of effort on, both in an automated way by training them ahead of time, but also by providing in-the-moment help in writing. So for example, in your IDE or as part of the ticket that you're getting out of Jira, in short courses that we offer, like quick tutorials, 5-minute tutorials, how do I fix a SQL injection in Java, for example, but then also providing help with actual people. So as a developer, you can go into our analysis center and you can say, hey, for this flaw, I want to schedule a consultation. I want to get on the call with a Ferrar coder who's a secure coding expert, and I want to go over my source code because even though I got all this help online, I just can't figure it out, and I need some help. So then they're going to jump on the phone with them for usually it's up to 45 minutes, go through it with them and discuss different options of figuring out how to fix that flaw. We also help you reduce the introduction of new flaws. So this is where you, for example, use our IDE scan, and you scan in your IDE, get real-time feedback, and we've seen some customers reduce the introduction of new flaws by 70%. That help you with hands-on training where developers are guided through 5-minute modules, showing them an intentionally vulnerable application, guiding them through the process of how to exploit it so they understand the impact of the vulnerability, and then they can drop down into the code, edit the code, it's real code, restart the web application, which is a containerized application that's just for them, and then run the same test again. And if they can no longer exploit it, they pass the module. Now, this is all done in a browser window. There is no local infrastructure you need to set up. It's all containerized per developer, so there is no interaction like if one developer fixes it, the other one sees something different, right? And because it's a real environment and not a simulated environment like some of the other solutions out there, the fact of whether something's exploitable or not is pretty apparent. Whereas if you're looking at a simulated environment, they're usually expecting a certain type of fix. And if the developer is creative and he finds a different way of achieving the same goal, they will not let them pass the module. And that can be pretty frustrating to a developer. If they've done the right thing, but the e-learning tool is not letting them pass, that's pretty frustrating. So we find that the hands-on training provides really good retention, has really high acceptance with developers, but also helps you with compliance. And then the third part of the Ferrar Code approach is AppSec governance. So here we're by your side and we help guide you through your AppSec program. A lot of the customers that come to us either haven't run an AppSec program before or they've been struggling with their previous AppSec program. So because we're, right now, for example, we're running over 2,500 programs. So we've got a tremendous amount of knowledge of what works in programs, what success looks like, and so on. And so we can help you increase your chances of success and get you there faster. So we start that by defining your program with you and helping you to achieve those goals. We'll check in with you periodically and help you report up to your stakeholders, whether that's security or senior leadership or development, and report back to them on how the program is positively impacting the organization. We'll help you scale through best practices that we've learned by running all of these programs, and we'll also help you sell the value of AppSec internally. When we're thinking about SaaS as a business model, I talked mostly about the things that give you a better service at a lower cost. So we talked about economies of scale. Didn't talk about fast start so much, that you're able to, essentially start scanning on the first day. But that's also like very much a primary thing with SaaS, that you're just getting started faster. We talked about scalability and high availability. We talked about the fact that it's always up to date because as a vendor, we help you do all of these things, and it's easy to use because you don't have to take care of things like stuck scans and those kind of things that can happen in any solution. The difference is that we will take care of that with our operational team, whereas with an on-prem solution, that's on you to try and figure out and troubleshoot. But there is also a much bigger part that's kind of like hidden under the waterline of the iceberg. And that's what I call the power of collective learning. When you have a SaaS solution, you have a few kind of like network effects that provide a superior solution. So for example, with a lot of on-prem solutions, they have a very limited number of applications in their QA lab, right, where they can try out like how is the accuracy of our scan engine, basically. With a SaaS solution like we have, especially a multi-tenant SaaS solution, we have scanned over 14 trillion lines of code in the 14 years that we have been in business, and it's growing faster and faster every year. And that has helped us tweak our algorithms to give you instant accuracy without tuning. Whereas for an on-prem solution, because they've got a smaller data set to tune their engines with, you need to go in as a customer and you need to tune every application to make sure that you don't have the false positives. So we give you much better results right out of the box because we're a multi-tenant SaaS solution. Then secondly, our best practices and industry benchmarks are derived from running 2,500 AppSec programs. If you're interested, we publish a State of Software Security report that is now in its 10th year. And we look across all industries and then also break things down by industry and look at what good looks like and who's more successful versus not. So for example, is it more effective to do a bug bash for a week and burn through a lot of vulnerabilities by focusing on that, or to reserve a certain amount of time on your development team to always do a little bit of progress with vulnerability remediation? So if you are interested in the answer to that, I encourage you to download the State of Software Security report. Then more effective collaboration through centralized workflow and analytics. So that's a mouthful. So what does that mean? Basically, because we're scanning in a central platform, you have access to the data from anywhere. All of your teams can have access from anywhere. Very good for distributed teams, but also if you're working with our services team, they can go into your results and help you pull statistics, right? Run analytics to put those into PowerPoint files so that you can share your successes with your stakeholders. One recommended reading I have on the topic of TCO and how to save money with your application security program is a report that Forrester brought out that we sponsored. And this Forrester study looked at on-premise companies that used to run an on-premise program and then switched to Ferrar Code. Now, we paid for this study, but Forrester executed that on our behalf. We didn't have any influence on the interviews. We were not on the interviews with the customers. We did not have influence on tweaking the results. So this is really an objective view from Forrester as an analyst. If you would like to have a look at that, you can find it on our website, but I also created a quick bit.ly link there. It's bit.ly/SaaSTCO, and I think that needs to be all in lowercase because the bit.ly links are case sensitive. All right, we're now ready to go to the FAQ section, or not the FAQ, the Q&A section of the webcast. And we have a few minutes for that. So I would love to see some audience questions come in. And I need to switch to a different screen here, so give me one moment. And you can submit those through BrightTalk right now. There's a Q&A section there. So first question here, which stakeholders should I talk to and how do I get them on board? All right, this is a really good question. So what we typically see is, and I assume that you're in a role that is tasked with application security in the organization. If that role exists, then presumably you already have the CISO basically on your side because he's funding your role. If you don't do application security currently, and it's not a stated part of your role, or it's not a big enough part of your role, and you want to expand that, then I think your first step is to get the CISO bought in and possibly the CIO. What I would do for that talk track is to look at, in the beginning of this presentation, we talked about how to start with your business model and with your current situation, and tying application security logically to that. So I think that's really important. Show the business value. Just because it's a good idea for security may not cut it, especially in times where budgets are super tight. So I would encourage you to build a really strong business case. It doesn't have to be long, and in fact, it's better if it's only between 1 and 3 slides, right? Make the high-level argument of why. Then once you have them on board, you should also try to get the engineering or software development side on board, because you're going to have to work with them on the application security program. You can't really succeed with application security if you don't have them on board. So here I would reach out, with the help of the CISO, I would reach out to the head of engineering and say, hey, we're planning to do this. It's going to increase the resiliency and the quality of the software because we're going to be less open to cyber attacks. And here is why this is a really important thing for the business to state the business case again. And they're probably going to refer you to somebody in their organization to make a technical decision. So this might be a software architect, for example. So make sure that you work with that person. Give them also the why it's important for the business. And then work with them to find a solution that works for both the security team and the development team. I think a lot of programs fail when you pick a solution or a mandate that only works for one side. I'll give you two extreme examples. If you choose a solution that's picked by security without development, you might pick a solution that only scans, like as a gate before the release. So that means if you're scanning at that time, you'll probably derail the roadmap because you're coming up with security feedback way too late, right? So that's going to create a lot of friction with the development team. Also make sure that the solution doesn't have a lot of false positives, because if developers are chasing their tail, running down false positives of your security solution, you're going to be in trouble, right? They're not going to pay attention to those results anymore. If you pick a solution that's only vetted by the developers, let's say like some QA solutions have started to add some security checks, you're going to be on the opposite side of the problem. You're going to have a solution that works great for the developers because it's a tool that they're already using, doesn't find everything, and it doesn't make it mandatory for the developers to fix things. They can actually override the findings, just say, oh, ignore. And so you're letting them grade their own homework. And now you have two problems. Number one, you're not actually reducing risk. You're not providing help to the developers if they actually want to reduce risk. And you're probably not going to pass compliance because the auditors are going to say, well, there is no oversight. There is no accountability, right? So how is that going to work? So in my view, you need a solution that works for both development and security. And with the security, I include the auditors, right? And for that reason, I think it's really important to align with your stakeholders on the other side of the house, bring both sides to the table, and jointly pick a solution, because that way you're going to really increase buy-in and success of the program. All right, let me look at other questions. All right, second question here is, how do I run an AppSec program if I can't hire more people? It's a very valid point. It's hard to hire AppSec people under normal circumstances because security budgets are small, and finding people with an AppSec background is really difficult. Like we're in the industry and we've got a really good network, and we still find it hard. And especially if you're in an area where you need, it might not be one of the major tech hubs, you're really going to be struggling to find somebody. Also, what you need may be very varied, and you might not be able to find one person who can cover it all. So for example, you need somebody to run the program and keep the stakeholders happy and onboard development teams. So you need somebody who's good with, talking to management, but also talking to developers, understanding their systems, onboarding them. So need some technical know-how. And then once you're getting to advising developers on how to fix flaws, now you're looking at a totally different skill set. You need somebody who's a developer with secure coding experience. And you need that for all the languages that you support, right? So, and now it gets really, really tricky. So with Ferrar Code, one of the things that we offer is we give you a pool of talent that you have access to. So the application security consultants that you get on the phone for your different developers might not always be the same person, because they will be a person that's skilled in that particular language. And you might have a couple of applications that are still coded in COBOL, but those applications are not the applications that you really want to focus on and spend, like hire a full-time person for. But it's really good to have access to that talent when you need it. So I think that's where we can help. And then our security program managers, completely different skill set, right? Working with people, onboarding development teams. Then we have another team that's just doing, just consulting with you on what's the best model to integrate Ferrar Code and application security into your pipeline. Like, what are the best integration points? How often should you scan? Should you fail the build? Should you, fail the build and stop a release from happening if you find something? Only on high severity flaws or also on medium? Like all of these things there's not a straight answer for everybody. It all depends on your environment. So it really helps to have an expert who's seen a lot of these and who you can call, because it might also differ from one team to the next. Because you probably have some teams that are working on high-risk applications versus some that are not so high-risk. You've probably got some teams that are working on super cutting-edge languages and technologies and releasing several times a day, and others that are releasing once or twice a year, right? So all of that has an impact on how you run the application security program. All right. Then next question. This actually dovetails into the previous question. So how do I automate security? We recommend that you automate security as much as possible. If you think about DevOps as a trend, all of the things that used to be done manually, like QA and deployment, have now been automated to the utmost possible. And that makes sense, because the more often you do it, the more you standardize, the faster you can go. If QA and release is not a manual process, but it's automated, hey, now instead of releasing once a quarter, maybe you can release once a week, once a day, several times a day. So the same concept applies to security. And so by automating security into the pipeline, you really help the company move faster. And so we typically recommend automating at integrating at 3 different levels. The first one is in the IDE. You want to get fast feedback in the IDE to make sure that your developers have the feedback as they're coding. It's going to reduce the introduction of new flaws. It's going to help them learn on the job on their own code. It's like having a secure coding mentor next to you. So that's number 1. Number 2 is integrate security into the pipeline. So in the IDE, you just get the feedback, completely voluntary, only exposed to the developer. In the pipeline, now we're still making it voluntary, but we're exposing it to the entire development team. So each time you run a build, we scan the code, we provide you feedback. Now it's for the team to enforce that or not, right? And to decide when they're going to fix a flaw, but they're at least aware of that at a team level. And now before you deploy, in most cases, unless you have a low-risk application, in which case you might want to do it like overnight or periodically, you should also have a security gate before you go to production. And that security gate is the one that is mandatory, that is tracked and recorded and audited. And these scans are what forms an audit trail for your compliance. And there are going to be certain rules put in place, so we call them policies, of how tall you need to be to ride. Like if you have any high severity flaws, you cannot release to production, for example, for this type of application. Or you need to fix it within 30 days, for this type of application. So we recommend automating, but having these different steps. And it's really important to kind of let the developers take care of things in their own time, have their own oversight, but then also, trust but verify then also having an official audit trail for things that go out into production. All right, I think these are all the questions I got from the audience. Yeah, that's everything. Really appreciate your jumping on. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and have a great day. Bye-bye.